welcome to Prime Property, your weekly real estate reckoner. I'm Nayantara Rai and this is what we have on the show today. It's a shocker for McDonald's. The Delhi High Court tells McDonald's to vacate a restaurant it's been running for 13 years at India's most expensive high street, Khan Market. McDonald's also has to pay a penalty. It has to retrospectively from February 2010 pay a 200% higher monthly rent of 11 lakh rupees plus 12.5% interest. The country's top lawyer, Harish Salve, had represented the 92-year-old widow that beat McDonald's. We asked Salve for tips. What all should landlords and tenants insist upon in lease deeds? Unitech, gunning for India's largest real estate asset sale, its London AIM-listed Unitech Corporate Parks has put a Gurgaon IT SEZ on the block for 2,800 to 3,000 crore rupees. McDonald's was in for a big shock earlier this month in what is being seen as a landmark judgment for lease renewals and the rental market at large. The Delhi High Court ruled against McDonald's, finding the multinational to have overstayed as an unwelcome tenant since February of 2010 and ordered the fast food giant to vacate in 8 weeks this 3-story restaurant at India's most expensive high street, Khan Market in Lutyens, Delhi. The penalty has also caused a ripple in the realty circle. The High Court instructed McDonald's to retrospectively pay a rent nearly 200% higher from February 2010. McDonald's has been directed to pay 11 lakh rupees a month and 12.5% interest, as against the 3.5 lakh rupees it had been paying as monthly rent. The court had taken the prevailing market rates to fix that amount. McDonald's lost the case to a 92-year-old widow, Niamat Kaur Anand, who since the lease expiry in 2010 had been fighting to reclaim her property. Anand was represented by her son's childhood friend and legal eagle Harish Salve. McDonald's, that had run the restaurant at this Khan Market property for 13 years, had moved the Delhi High Court after losing an arbitration which had been awarded by former Justice A.P. Shah. The Delhi High Court had upheld that arbitration award. Experts say a precedent has been created not just over the penalty or the mean profits that is being levied on the multinational tenant, but also on the basis of which a tenant and a landlord can interpret contract clauses to renew a lease deed. In this particular case, the lease deed was for a period of 9 years with rent to be increased after 5 years at the rate of 25% over the last rent paid. Problems arose in 2009 when Anand indicated to McDonald's it should pay a higher rent as per the market rates in case it wants to renew the lease. The company responded by signing a letter of intent allegedly signed by Kaur in 2001, saying she had agreed to let out the premises for 18 years. The company also questioned the rationale behind her decision to increase the rent, saying such a steep hike isn't agreeable to it. Justice Shah, in the arbitration award subsequently upheld by the Delhi High Court, concluded the registered lease deed dated 12th of February 2001 was for 9 years, while a letter cited by McDonald's as an agreement to extend the lease by another 9 years is merely an offer and therefore not a concluded legal contract. So how will this case impact lease deeds going forward? What are the clauses tenants and landlords must insist upon in a contract? Anand had the good fortune to have easy access to Harish Salve in executing a lease deed that beat McDonald's. We asked Salve for helpful tips. Mr. Salve, landlords normally feel safer letting out properties to MNCs. Why has this McDonald's case, according to you, set an important precedent? Is it only because of the penalty or even, because there was an arbitration clause in the lease deed, which is not really a common practice?
It's a good in the time scale which we have seen, because there was a big problem which actually became exactly the reverse of the intention of the lawmakers. They exempted properties over 3,500 per month from rent control, because those kind of tenants who can afford to pay, that's not what the rent control law is meant for. Like in Bombay, if you're a company with a share capital of more than 1 crore, you're not protected by the Rent Act. Now the problem is, the Rent Act courts actually were faster. So what you now have to do is file a suit for possession, and the suit for possession takes forever in our legal system. So landlords are always struggling to get their property back if the tenant turns around and says sets up some kind of a defense and says, all right, I know I'll lose the case, but I at least have the property for the next 10 years. So this is a good format which can be that for when you're letting properties to large companies, insist on a good arbitration clause.
since land and property is normally seen as a state subject, can you explain to our viewers whether this case creates a precedent only in New Delhi or pan-India? You know, for instance, each state has its own Rent Act, which will then, I'm guessing, have to be factored in all of these lease deeds.
No, anywhere in India, see, a lease ultimately is a matter of contract. Even if you are writing a rent note and you don't want to execute a formal lease, I would always now advise people have an arbitration clause saying it will go to arbitration of an arbitrator to be appointed jointly by parties. If the parties fail to appoint, the court appoints an arbitrator. That's a very shortcut proceeding. An arbitrator is appointed and then the matter goes on. So at least you get a decree from the arbitrator within a finite period of time. If you have a good arbitrator, it is definitely a finite period of time.
Mr. Salve, let's move away from the McDonald's case for now. People normally have to pay a bombshell to get advice from you. But tell us, according to you, what all should tenants insist upon while taking up a property?
Must have is a clear clause in which there must be if there is a renewal clause, it must provide the manner in which the renewal is to be exercised, point number one. Point two, it should say that the lease is a complete contract and no other writing, whether before or after, shall constitute any contract for renewal save and except in accordance with the lease. The third thing which should be provided is an arbitration clause.
While litigation is very popular in India, Mr. Salve, arbitration really isn't, especially when we talk about landlords and tenants. So even if the two parties were to look at this, any clauses that they must include within the arbitration clause?
I would in fact add a clause in the arbitration clause saying the arbitrator shall award costs on well-settled principles. In England, if you ran a false defense, you would have to pay huge amount of costs. I mean, I have seen cost orders in England running into millions of pounds for running a false case. We don't do that in India, so that is why litigation drags on and people just carry on merrily. So we must have these, we must encourage these kind of alternate dispute resolution clauses which have a compact remedy.
Okay, we've covered tenants. Now let's talk about landlords. What's your advice for those guys looking to let out property?
You see, landlords, when they are drawing up leases, we have unfortunately in India given up the practice of drawing up a proper lease deed. There are any number of standard templates, you can virtually Google them and find out. There are standard templates with clauses for handing over possession, clauses for keeping the properties in good repair, clauses for paying rents, rates and outgoings, clauses for forfeiture for misuse, renewal clauses, etc. These are in any template of a lease. Landlords who want to be sensible, I would advise them, please don't try and shortcut and save money on stamp duty. Have a registered lease. The biggest thing in our favor was this was a registered lease. Have a registered lease, believe me, it's worth the investment.
So a registered lease deed is a must, that's your advice. But is that ammunition really enough for a landlord to reclaim property? It's never going to be quick, but you say it can help in speeding up the process.
Well, you see, there is nothing you can do to prevent a man who's staying in your house from not vacating. What you can do is, and what you must do is, you must provide that mean profits will be paid on market value, which in any case is the law. So what happens is, and once tenants realize that they are not going to get a free or a discounted ride for their period of overstay, they are going to end up paying current market values, there is going to be trouble. In fact, possibly what the media and channels like you can do is run sort of a circular or a ready reckoner rate of properties, and landlords would benefit immensely from that, and that then will become the acceptable evidence, because the advantage of an arbitration is you don't have to follow the strict rules of the law of evidence or strict rules of code of civil procedure to prove something. So if you have a good ready reckoner of property, that will be the other thing. In this case, fortunately, the landlady had a quotation from another person who was interested in a property. So we produced that person. They were decent enough to send somebody who flew down here and said, yes, here was our offer. So she has actually got the rent she would have got from a back date.
So if I've got it right, you're saying there should be an agreement to have mean profits and damages that must be agreed upon at the time of signing the lease deed.
See, I can understand somebody saying, look, for 3 years I want a fixed rent. Fair enough. But the crucial thing is, you should agree in advance that if you overstay, you will pay me damages on the basis of market rate of this property as fixed in the ready reckoner published by X or Y. You can agree that in advance. So at least the poor landlord then doesn't have to go running around getting valuation reports, putting expert witnesses in the box, and you can cross-examine a person, and ultimately then it becomes chancellor's foot, you know, should it be 5, should it be 6, should it be 4, valuation is always this. So this is a clause which can be put into the lease deeds. If there is a good ready reckoner which somebody takes on to publish, you can say that we will go by the average market quotation, or we'll go by this so-and-so ready reckoner. You can agree that in advance.
But Mr. Salve, if the two parties agree to ready reckoners, etc., it'll only be fair for a tenant to go to a landlord, let's say during a property down cycle, and say, reduce my rent, the market is down, rentals have fallen.
See, one is Nayantara, you have to make a distinction between two periods. One is the currency of the lease, one is post-lease. During the currency of the lease, it's a matter of contractual negotiation whether somebody wants a flexible rent or a fixed rent. It's like you want to take a mortgage, you have to take a call. Do you want flexible rates of interest or fixed rates of interest? Sometimes one loses, sometimes the other loses. Many times landlords want certainty of income. They are happy if they get this much income for a period of 3 years. So you have a fixed lease during the currency of the lease. Believe me, in my experience, there has never really been a problem about the currency of the lease. The problem arises post-currency of the lease. 5 years it takes to get your premises back. How much are you going to be compensated in damages for that 5 years of overstay? That becomes very difficult for a landlord to prove. What is the current market rate? And you also know market rate is never really reflected in full check payments. So it becomes very difficult to prove what is the current market rate.
Well, that's the country's top legal eagle, Harish Salve, giving you free advice on what all to include in lease deeds. On that note, we're going to slip into a short break. On the other side, we'll tell you about how Unitech is attempting India's largest real estate asset sale for 2,800 to 3,000 crore rupees. Stay tuned.